Her wrists ached where the cold iron bit into her skin, the heavy chains rattling whenever she tried to move, and though the prairie wind blew dust into her eyes, the Apache girl kept her head bowed, refusing to show even a flicker of defiance. To the ranch hands she was nothing but a prize, a captured daughter of the desert meant to break, to humble, to remind others of the rancher's power. Her long, dark hair hung like a veil, hiding the sharp gleam of her eyes, the fire she still carried within, but to them she was broken, silent, defeated, head bowed in surrender. Yet what they could not see, and what time itself seemed to hold its breath waiting for, was that a man unlike the rest was walking through the gates of the farm that day. His arrival would change everything, for when he saw her bound and silenced, something inside him rose like a storm, not greed, not cruelty, but a burning sense of justice he had never felt before. The land was harsh, the air thick with the smell of horses, sweat, and smoke, but he stood taller than the men around him, a stranger whose eyes carried the weight of battles and losses of his own. His name was Matthew, a man hardened by long years of wandering, searching for a place to call home. He had come to this farm not to conquer, but to build, and what he found instead was a scene that ripped through him like a blade. The girl's slender frame, chained to a post near the barn, was more than just an image of cruelty, it was a symbol of how far men would go to break what they feared. Matthew's jaw clenched as he watched the others mock her silence, toss scraps near her feet as though she were less than human. He could not look away. The Apache girl lifted her eyes only once, and even then only for a heartbeat, but that single glance struck Matthew harder than any bullet. Behind the curtain of hair, behind the lowered head, was a gaze filled with untold stories, pain, pride, and a dignity unbroken by the iron around her wrists. It was a look that spoke without words, a plea not for pity, but for recognition, for someone to see her as she truly was. Matthew's chest tightened, and for the first time in years, he felt anger not just for his own past wounds, but for hers. The rancher, a broad man with a booming voice, noticed the newcomer's stare and smirked. "She won't last long," he said with the casual cruelty of someone who had seen too much suffering and stopped caring. "These wild ones never do. But it teaches a lesson to the rest." His words made the other men chuckle, their boots scraping against the dust as they walked away, leaving the girl slumped forward, her chains heavy, her head bowed again. But Matthew didn't laugh, he didn't even move, except for the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. As the sun lowered, painting the horizon in blood-red streaks, Matthew approached slowly, his boots crunching against the dirt. The girl didn't flinch, she had learned long ago that men came near only to humiliate, to demand, to take. She kept her head down, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her gaze. But this time was different. He crouched low, his shadow falling over her like a shield, and for a moment neither spoke. The chains rattled faintly as the wind pushed against them, and Matthew's voice came low, steady, carrying no command but something she had not heard in a long time, gentleness. "Lift your head." Her breath caught, she wanted to resist, to spit in the dust and turn away, but something in his tone tugged at the last fragile thread of trust buried deep inside her. Slowly, uncertainly, her chin rose, and her eyes met his. What she saw startled her. Not the hunger of conquest, not the cold emptiness of cruelty, but compassion, raw, unshakable, burning as fiercely as the desert. "Son." For the first time since her capture, the chains around her wrists felt weaker than the force of his gaze, and though her body trembled, she held his eyes and let her head rise. Matthew swallowed hard, struck by the quiet strength in her face. Even broken, even bound, she radiated a spirit untamed, a spirit that no chain could hold forever. He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against the iron shackles, and in that instant he made a silent vow, she would not stay chained here. Not if it cost him everything. The girl's lips parted as though to speak, but no words came, only the trembling breath of someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. That night, as the ranch house filled with the laughter of men who believed the world belonged to them, Matthew lay awake, staring at the wooden beams above him. The image of her bowed head haunted him, but even more haunting was the moment it lifted. It was as though in raising her gaze, she had placed something in his hands, trust, fragile and easily broken, but more valuable than gold. And he knew, deep down, that he could not walk away. The farm was a place of cruelty, but Matthew's heart had already chosen its course. He would lift her head again, not just once, but forever. And if the rancher and his men stood in his way, then so be it. For the first time in years, Matthew had found something worth fighting for. Morning came with a blazing sun, spilling light across the ranch, but for Matthew, the warmth did nothing to thaw the storm growing inside him. The laughter of the ranch hands echoed across the yard, their boots and spurs clanking as they prepared the day's work, but their cruelty from the night before replayed in his mind with every step he took. He had seen much in his years, men dying on battlefields, settlers carving out land with blood and sweat, but nothing had struck him as sharply as the sight of that girl in chains. She wasn't a prisoner of war, nor some wild animal to be tamed. She was a human being, proud and strong, her head forced down only by the weight of iron and humiliation. That image had carved itself into his soul, and it demanded action. The rancher was already at the porch, sipping whiskey before noon, his thick fingers drumming against the glass. He saw Matthew coming and narrowed his eyes. "You've got that look," he drawled, his voice heavy with suspicion. "Don't go thinking you're here to change things. This is my land, my rules. She's mine, just like the horses and the cattle. Don't mistake pity for justice. Out here, justice is survival." His words hit like blunt stones, but Matthew didn't flinch. He'd faced worse men before, but what made the rancher dangerous wasn't his fists or his guns, it was his belief that cruelty was his right. When Matthew didn't answer, the rancher smirked. "What's the matter? You going soft? She ain't worth a dime. Apache blood never bends, except under chain." The other men laughed at the remark, and for a moment Matthew's vision blurred red with fury. He clenched his fists at his sides, forcing himself to stay silent, knowing that striking too soon would doom both him and the girl. Instead, he walked past, every step deliberate, until he found himself once again near the post where she was bound. Her head was lowered again, hair falling in tangled waves across her face, but when his shadow stretched over her, she stirred slightly. It was the smallest of movements, but it was enough to tell Matthew she knew it was him. He crouched once more, his voice low so no one else could hear. "Don't bow anymore," he whispered. "Not while I'm here." Her eyes flickered up to his, hesitant but burning with the ember of something long suppressed, hope. She tried to speak, her dry lips parting, but no words came. Instead, she let out a shaky breath, a sound that told Matthew all he needed to know. She wanted freedom, even if fear kept her silent. The chains around her wrists were cruelly tight, the metal biting deep into her skin. Matthew ran his hand along them, his jaw tightening at the sight of dried blood where the shackles had cut her raw. He muttered under his breath, "This isn't the life you'll die in. Not if I have a say." She studied him carefully, wary, as though she feared he might be another false promise. But there was something steady in his gaze, something that made her believe, if only for a moment, that this man was different. By the afternoon, Matthew began to test the boundaries of his defiance. When the rancher ordered the girl to be given only scraps, Matthew instead brought her a full plate from the cookhouse, setting it down without a word. The ranch hands jeered at him, muttering about his soft heart, and predicting he wouldn't last a week on the farm. But Matthew didn't care. The way she looked at the food, hesitant, almost afraid it would be taken away, was worth their mockery. For the first time since her capture, she ate without lowering her eyes, and Matthew caught the faintest flicker of pride crossing her face. Later that day, he watched as the rancher's men tried to break her spirit further, ordering her to kneel in the dirt while they taunted her. Matthew stepped in, his voice sharp as a whip. "Enough." The men froze, shocked by his tone. No one defied the rancher's rules. But Matthew didn't stop there. He helped her to her feet, brushing the dust from her shoulders, and in that simple gesture, he had declared war on the entire order of the ranch. The girl trembled, caught between fear of punishment and the quiet thrill of being defended. The rancher stormed over, face red with fury. "You got a problem, boy," he growled, fists tightening. The yard fell silent, all eyes fixed on the confrontation. Matthew stood tall, his hand resting casually near his hip where his revolver hung. "She's no beast," he said flatly. "If you've got chains, use them on cattle, not people." The words dropped like stones in water, rippling across the crowd. Gasps broke out, some men whispering, others grinning in anticipation of the fight that was surely coming. The Apache girl's heart raced as she watched, her breath catching in her throat. No one had ever spoken for her before, not since her capture. She felt something stirring deep inside, something that almost hurt to feel again, dignity. Though her body was still bound, though her wrists still bled, her head lifted higher, her back straighter. She looked at Matthew not as a stranger now, but as the one who dared to see her as more than chains. The rancher spat into the dirt, his voice low and menacing. "You'll regret this, boy." Nobody defies me under my roof. But Matthew didn't back down. He knew the storm was only beginning, that every step forward was placing him closer to danger. Still, as he glanced once more at the girl, her head no longer bowed, her eyes shining with defiance renewed, he knew he'd already chosen his side. There was no turning back. That night, when darkness covered the ranch and the fires burned low, Matthew sat awake again, staring out at the stars. The farm was alive with whispers, men muttering about the confrontation, some waiting eagerly for blood to spill. But his thoughts were only of her, the girl who had bowed her head until he lifted it. Somewhere deep inside, he knew their fates were now tied, and if the ranch demanded blood, then Matthew was ready to spill his before he let her remain a prisoner.